Hey everybody, it's Seth with Stuff Seth Makes, and this is the Monroe Serving Board. When I designed this serving board, I wanted it to be sleek and sort of mid-century modern inspired, and when I got an order to make 3 dozen of them, I knew I needed to come up with a way to replicate the design over and over again. To do that, I used a few jigs and templates so that I could make all my cuts repeatable so that everything was in the same spot over and over and over. In this video, I'm going to explain those jigs and templates a little bit more and show you how I used them to finish out this order. And I know you're probably wondering, why is it called the Monroe Serving Board? Because it's got a beauty mark, like Marilyn Monroe. Let's get started. When I was designing the Monroe Serving Board, there was really only one wood that I wanted to use, and that was walnut. I felt like walnut really lends itself to the modern angular shape of the serving board. Once I got the walnut into the shop, the first thing I needed to do was use my shape template so I could lay out as many of the Monroe boards as I could fit onto the walnut lumber. I was making 2 different sizes for this order, and laying out the board shapes on the raw lumber was a little bit like a puzzle because I was trying to keep the grain direction in mind and also avoid any of the knots and imperfections in the walnut boards. Next, I used my jigsaw to cut the walnut lumber into pieces that were easier to manage. Once I had all the shapes traced out, I went ahead and sent all the walnut through the planer to get it down to the right thickness, and I kept the outlines face down so they wouldn't get planed away. And of course, my jet dust collector earned its keep once again. Be sure to check out my other video on that dust collector. I'll have a link up in the corner. When I was done planing, I could shift and shimmy a few things around in the shop and bring out the bandsaw and started rough cutting all the boards, staying just barely outside my marker line. To keep the walnut pieces secure to the templates, I used a screw on each end. I used to use double-sided tape, but I find the screws keep the pieces aligned better. With the double-sided tape, I found that I'd still get a little bit of wiggle between the template and the workpiece. Next, I loaded up a pattern bit in the router table and I set the height. Pattern bits come with a bearing located at the top of the bit, at the bottom of the bit, or both. In this application, I like having the bearing at the top so it rides along the template because I have a better visual of the walnut being trimmed away. It's also safer since my hand is so close to the top of the bit. Now that I've routed all the boards to shape, you may notice I have a small hole in the plywood template. What that is a location hole for a detail you'll see a bit later. I used a nail set and a mallet to mark a spot on each of the workpieces. I made a special jig for routing the dished out areas of these boards. There's one jig for the small boards and another for the big boards. I made it so the workpiece fits right into place, and then using the existing screw holes from the first template, I can secure the workpiece to this jig with a couple of screws. For dishing out material, I'm using the bowl and tray bit made by Whiteside, along with a collet extender, and then I load those into my Bosch plunge router. Since removing so much material is going to get pretty messy, I wanted to jerry-rig a dual hose setup for my jet dust collector. And what I did was run my 4-inch hose up to a chain so it could hang out of the way. I rigged up a Y adapter with a couple shop vac hoses attached to that, and then the ends of those will just stay in a fixed location at the end of the workpiece. I also ran another hose for my shop vac, also up to a hanger to keep it out of the way, and back down to the dust extraction port on my router base. And I know it's a bit of a spaghetti mess, but sometimes when it comes to dust, you just gotta do what you gotta do. Securing your workpiece when you're using your router like this is super crucial because the last thing you want is for that thing to come loose and go flying around your shop and break a tool or break your face. You don't want that. So I clamp it down to my tabletop. Then I bring the router over to the workpiece and I can set the depth stop on the router, and that way I can make sure that my router bit isn't going to plunge deeper than I want it to. Then I cut. Since there's a little bit of extra length on the ends to accommodate the template screws, I need to trim that off. And as you can see, I've got some markings on the template, and all I need to do is transfer those markings over to the workpiece, and this way I know right where to cut. After making the marks, I took one of the boards over to the miter saw and used that line for reference to set the miter angle on the saw. Then, using a scrap piece of plywood, I make the first cut. And then, I brought the walnut board back in and once again lined up the blade with the line on my board. Then I could clamp the plywood down so it acts as an angled stop block. And then I can just bring the boards in, butt them up to the plywood, and make my cuts. And since the angle is the same on both ends, I can keep the stop block in place and make the cuts on the other end too. I also made these cute little templates. One of these is for the larger boards and one of them is for the smaller boards. And these help me to quickly locate where I'll drill the holes in the handles. All I have to do is place this little template over the handle, give it a quick tap with my awl, and they're ready for the next step over at the drill press. When I was finished drilling out the larger holes with one Forstner bit, I swapped it out to a smaller Forstner bit, and then I drilled an additional hole where, if you recall, I marked earlier in the project. While I love the angular, pointy design I came up with for these boards, it's exactly that, pointy and sharp. So I jumped over to the belt sander and gave all the sharp ends a little radius, and after that, it's onto the router table, and that way I can give all these edges and finger holes a small round over. Moving on, I pull out my metal cutting bandsaw that I have mounted on drawer slides underneath my welding table. I love mounting tools on drawer slides. I recently put a couple bench grinders on some drawer slides too, and you could check out that video right here. This little saw has a table accessory with it, so I mounted that in place. And since jigs and templates seem to be sort of a common theme on this build, why not add one more? I'm going to be cutting little ends off of some stainless steel rod, about 3/8 of an inch long, and to help keep the little cutoffs from falling off and getting lost, I threw together this little sled for the bandsaw table. To use it, I start by giving the tip of the stainless rod a quick deburring. This sled/jig thing has a little cradle, and that holds the rod in place on one side of the blade, and there's a 3/8 inch deep hole with the same diameter of the rod on the other side of the blade. And then I can insert the rod into the hole. Now I can push the sled forward, make my cut, and my fingers stay safe. If I ever find myself doing another batch of these Monroe serving boards, I think I might refine this jig just a little bit, but as you can see, it worked out great for this one. If I happen to have any particularly pesky burrs on the little piece after the cut, I can clean them up again using some vice grips. Otherwise, it's twinkle twinkle little steel. With all the little stainless steel bits cut to length, I can start installing them on the boards. A little 2-part epoxy, a little mixing, and we're off to the races. After the epoxy has cured, it's time to sand, and sand, and sand, and sand, and sand, and sand, and sand. But once that's done, I can lay out where I want to mount the little rubber feet and use my awl once again to mark the location. Now it's time to bring back the template I used with the dishing bit, and I made an additional little piece that I can screw to the template that allows me to brand the boards in the same exact spot every time. Now I can fire up the torch, spritz the location with some water, heat up my branding iron, and leave my mark. 3 dozen times. Now that all the hard work is done, it's time to give the boards an oil bath. This is simply a food-grade mineral oil that I poured into a small tub, and I just put each board in there and work the oil into the wood for a couple of minutes. And then I hang them on this little rack that I made so that they can drip dry. To give the boards their final finish and a little extra luster, I use the walrus oil wood wax. This stuff is really easy to use. You just wipe on a thin layer and you work it into the surface and let it dry for about 15 minutes. After that, you just buff it out with a rag. This was the first time I'd used the walrus oil product, but I was really happy with it, and it's all I've used for my cutting board projects ever since. Now, I finally get to install the little rubber feet and enjoy the fruits of my labor. I hope you enjoyed seeing how I made these boards, and maybe you even learned a trick or two. If so, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what part of this project was your favorite. As always, I'll have links in the description to the tools and products I use for this project. And of course, if you're not already a subscriber, I hope you'll consider subscribing so you can see more projects coming soon. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.